The Kuoshu Gymnasium on Beaudry Avenue in Los Angeles sat beneath fluorescent tubes that buzzed at a frequency nobody ever bothered to fix. It was the first Tuesday of March 1967, and the training floor was already full by 7 in the morning. 41 practitioners from 11 schools had been invited. The mats ran wall to wall. The tournament director, a man named Harold Chin who had been ranking fighters since 1954, stood at a folding table near the east wall with a clipboard pressed against his chest and a pen he had not uncapped. He was not taking notes, he was watching. The room smelled of pine resin and liniment and the particular kind of sweat that belongs only to men who train without an audience. Outside, the trucks on Beaudry were moving cargo north to the warehouse district. The traffic signal at the corner clicked through its cycle with no one watching it. Inside, a young man from Hong Kong was sitting in the fourth row of bleacher benches, in a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, wearing street shoes on a training floor where everyone else had bare feet or canvas slippers. He had arrived 20 minutes early and had not spoken to anyone. He was 26 years old. He weighed 135 pounds. He looked as though he had wandered in from a different building. Across the gymnasium, warming up against the north wall, was a man who had every reason to be there. His name was Victor Kwong. He was 24 years old, 6 feet 1 inch tall, and 211 pounds of documented, verified, tournament-proven fighting weight. He had won the Pacific Rim Full Contact Championship in 1965. He had defended it the following year without losing a single round. His Sifu had trained under Chen Fake in Beijing, which meant his lineage was not a conversation, it was a credential. He had broken boards that morning before breakfast, not for performance, not for applause, but because he broke boards before breakfast every morning. The way other men made coffee. He had driven 30 miles to be in that gymnasium. He had a reason. 2 weeks earlier, at a banquet in Chinatown hosted by the Southern California Chinese Athletic Association, Victor Kwong had heard the name Bruce Lee used in a sentence that bothered him. A film producer sitting 3 seats to his left had said, unprompted, that Bruce Lee was the most dangerous man in Southern California. Not the most interesting, not the most photogenic, the most dangerous. Victor Kwong had set his chopsticks down with a deliberate sound. He had asked politely who Bruce Lee had beaten. The table had gone quiet in the way that tables go quiet when someone says something that cannot be unsaid. The producer had named a few names. Victor Kwong had recognized them. They were not nobodies, but they were not champions, and they were not Victor Kwong. He had been told that the man he was looking for would be at the Tuesday session on Beaudry. He had been told the man was small and quiet, and not easy to spot in a crowd. He had looked around the gymnasium that morning and made a private calculation. There were perhaps 5 men in the room who could give him a serious match. The young man in the white linen shirt and street shoes on the fourth bench was not among them. In the next 41 seconds, starting from the moment Victor Kwong crossed the gymnasium floor, everything Victor Kwong understood about danger would be revised. Nobody in that room understood yet what kind of morning this was about to become. Harold Chin still had not uncapped his pen. Victor Kwong's credentials were not manufactured. That is the first thing that must be understood about what happened on Beaudry Avenue, because the story only carries its full weight if you accept that the man walking toward the bleachers was genuinely formidable. He was not overconfident because he was weak and deluded. He was overconfident because he was strong and had never met a ceiling. His 1965 championship bout had lasted 4 minutes and 8 seconds. He had closed the distance on a fighter 6 inches shorter than himself, absorbed 2 kicks to the body without flinching, and ended the match with a hip throw followed by a ground control that the referee had needed to physically separate. He did not celebrate afterward. He accepted the trophy, set it on a table, and went back to the training floor. His students, 8 of them at that time, had learned the lesson without being taught it. You do not train to win trophies. You train until the trophy is the smaller thing that happens. By 1967, he had 22 students paying monthly tuition. 3 of them had placed in regional tournaments. He was building something. He had a reputation that had crossed 2 oceans. Because reputation in the martial arts moves in the same channels as rumor, through letters, through visiting practitioners, through the conversations of men who train together and then part and carry what they saw to the next place they go. His only flaw, and it was not apparent to anyone watching him warm up against the north wall that morning, was that he had built his map of the world using the terrain he had already crossed. He knew how large he was relative to the men he had met. He had not yet met a man who had drawn a different map entirely. He did not know that such a man was possible. That is the particular species of certainty that does not yield to argument. It only yields to evidence. He finished his warm-up at 7:41. He rolled his shoulders once. He walked toward the bleachers. He had seen the young man in the white linen shirt when he arrived, and he had filed him away in the category that experienced fighters maintain for people who are not worth filing anywhere else. He walked toward him now not because he had revised that assessment, but because the young man was sitting in the center of the row where Victor Kwong intended to sit. And Victor Kwong wanted his preferred seat. He stopped 3 feet from the bench. He looked at the man in the linen shirt. He said, loud enough for the 7 practitioners nearest to him to hear clearly, "Your Jeet Kune Do is a film set invention. You belong in a movie studio, not on a training floor. I know who you are. I am not impressed by who you are. Show me something worth being impressed by, or clear the bench for men who have earned the space." The gymnasium did not go immediately silent. It went silent in sections, the way silence travels through a crowd, one person stopping and touching another person's arm, and that person turning, and the ring of quiet expanding outward from the epicenter of those words until the fluorescent lights were the loudest thing in the room. Harold Chin uncapped his pen. He did not write anything. He held the uncapped pen above his clipboard and he listened. If you want to know what Bruce Lee said in response to those 47 words and what he did in the 41 seconds that followed, stay with this until the end. Because the sentence he spoke from the center of that gymnasium floor would travel through dojos on 3 continents for the next 30 years. And it would arrive in places Bruce Lee never visited, changed in its details but unchanged in its meaning. Before we get there, if this is the kind of story you come to this channel for, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. There are viewers in this community who have been training longer than most practitioners have been alive. We want to know where you are. Bruce Lee did not stand immediately. That is the detail that the witnesses who were there, all 6 of them who were interviewed separately over the following decade, remembered first, before they remembered anything else about that morning. He did not stand immediately. He sat for a moment that lasted approximately 4 seconds, which in the acoustics of a silent gymnasium is a very long 4 seconds. He was not hesitating. Anyone who believed he was hesitating did not know what they were looking at. He was making a decision, not about whether to respond, about how. He set down the paper cup of tea he had been holding in his left hand. He set it on the bleacher bench beside him with enough care that it did not spill. He stood. He removed his linen shirt. He folded it, once along the shoulders, once across the middle, and placed it on the bench next to the tea. He was wearing a black short-sleeved shirt beneath it. He stepped out of his street shoes without untying them. He placed them side by side under the bench with his toes pointed forward. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not bounce on his heels. He did not shake his hands loose or crack his knuckles or perform any of the pre-fight rituals that practitioners use to signal that a fight is coming. He simply walked toward the open training floor. He walked the way a man walks when he is going somewhere he has already been. He stopped at the center of the mat. He stood with his feet at shoulder width. His hands were at his sides. He looked at Victor Kwong with an expression that the witnesses would later struggle to describe accurately, because it did not fit any of the categories they had been trained to read. It was not anger. It was not contempt. It was not challenge. The closest any of them came was the tournament director, Harold Chin, who said in a 1981 interview that Bruce Lee's expression in that moment was the specific expression of a man who already knows the answer to the question and is waiting with genuine patience for the other person to finish asking it. He said 2 words. He said them quietly enough that only the nearest 4 people heard them clearly. He said, "When you are ready." Victor Kwong stepped onto the mat. He was larger by 3 inches and 76 pounds. He was the Pacific Rim champion. He was 24 years old and had never been beaten. He moved with the assurance of someone who had been the most dangerous person in every room he had entered for the better part of 3 years. He settled into his stance. He brought his hands up. He breathed out once through his nose. He looked at the man across the mat from him the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. He had not yet understood what he was standing in front of. A fight is not two men moving toward each other. A fight is a conversation about space, and the first thing that happens in any real confrontation is that one man proposes a distance, and the other man either accepts that proposal or refuses it. The man who controls the distance controls everything that follows. Victor Kwong had built his entire record on a simple and effective spatial proposition. He was bigger than most opponents, and he would use that size to establish a distance where his reach gave him an advantage and then press that advantage without mercy. It had worked 22 times, it had not failed once. He moved forward. Bruce Lee did not move back. He moved laterally, 3 inches to his left, at a speed that Harold Chin, standing 14 feet away at the east wall, would later describe as the kind of speed you see and then immediately doubt you saw. He moved 3 inches. That was all. Victor Kwong's lead hand passed through empty air at the place where Bruce Lee's shoulder had been. Second 1. Victor Kwong recovered and reset. He was a trained fighter. He did not chase the space he had lost. He recalculated. He stepped right. He came in lower. He threw a combination, jab, cross, body hook, that had ended matches at the regional level and that he had practiced to the point where it was no longer a decision but a reflex. The jab landed on nothing. The cross landed on nothing. The body hook was intercepted, not blocked, intercepted, by the palm of Bruce Lee's left hand, which closed around Kwong's wrist with a grip that Kwong would describe in a conversation 14 years later as feeling like a band of iron that had been placed there before the punch was thrown. Second 2. Paul Sato, a Hung Gar practitioner with 12 years of tournament experience who was standing 7 feet from the mat along the south wall, stopped breathing. He did not realize he had stopped breathing until the moment was over. He would not realize this until he told the story to his own students in 1974, and one of them asked him what he had felt in his body, and he stopped and thought, and said, "I stopped breathing at second 2 and did not start again until it was finished." Second 3. Victor Kwong was not beaten yet. He wrenched his wrist free. The grip released. He stepped back, creating space, and he threw the technique he had been holding in reserve since the beginning of the session. A spinning heel kick that he had thrown in competition 7 times and that had ended the match on 5 of those 7 occasions. It was, by any objective measurement, a serious technique thrown by a serious practitioner. It arrived at the space to the left of Bruce Lee's temple and found nothing there. Bruce Lee had moved not backward and not sideward but forward, inside the arc of the kick, at the moment of commitment, and the kick passed over his left shoulder with a sound like cloth in a light wind. Second 6. James Wong, a young journalist covering the Chinese-American athletic community for a Chinatown newspaper, was standing against the north wall with a small notepad. He had gone there to write a short item about a regional training session. He looked down at his notepad. He had written nothing. He looked back at the mat. Second 8. Bruce Lee's right hand had moved. That was what the witnesses agreed on. Where it had moved to, and in what sequence, was something that each of the 6 accounts rendered slightly differently, because the hand had moved at a velocity that the human eye records as impression rather than information. What they agreed on was the aftermath. Victor Kwong was standing with his back foot 6 inches farther behind him than it had been 1 second earlier, and his chin was elevated at an angle that did not belong to a man who was in control of his own posture, and his right hand was at his side rather than guarding his jaw. And Bruce Lee's right fist was stopped 1 inch from the point of Victor Kwong's jaw, extended, held perfectly still, and Bruce Lee's eyes were open and calm and waiting. The gymnasium was quiet enough to hear the fluorescent tubes buzzing. There are men who accept what has happened to them and men who construct a story about what has happened to them. Victor Kwong stood at that crossroads for a moment that lasted approximately 3 seconds. He was a champion. He was also, underneath the championships and the reputation and the 22 unbeaten bouts, something more important than those things. He was honest. His Sifu had insisted on it. "You will be defeated one day," his Sifu had told him when he was 16 years old. The question is whether you will be defeated well. Bruce Lee withdrew his fist. He extended his hand flat, palm up, in the gesture that means the same thing in every martial discipline in the world. Victor Kwong looked at the hand. He looked at the man it belonged to. He said something that only Bruce Lee heard clearly. It was 6 words. Harold Chin, who was the closest person outside the two men, thought he heard four of them. He heard, "That has never happened." The other two words were lost to the distance between them. Bruce Lee said something in return. It was equally quiet. It was a single sentence. No one outside the two men heard any part of it. But Victor Kwong nodded, slowly, once. The way a man nods when something has been settled that he did not expect to be settled. He took the extended hand, he shook it, he stepped back off the mat, he picked up his training bag from the bench where he had left it. He walked to the east wall and he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and he stayed there for the remainder of the session, not injured, not sulking, but thinking. Harold Chin watched him for 40 minutes from across the room. He would say later that in 31 years of running training sessions, he had never seen a man think that hard with his eyes open. The story traveled the way these stories travel. Paul Cito told it to his students. James Wong wrote a short paragraph about it that appeared on page 11 of a Chinatown newspaper with a circulation of 3,000. A stunt coordinator named Eddie Mateo heard it from a practitioner at a training session in Burbank and told it on a film set 2 days later. By the end of 1967, it had been in 5 cities. By 1969, it had reached practitioners in London and Manila. By the time Bruce Lee died in July 1973, the story had already grown a second layer of details that no one who was there had provided. A crowd of 300 where there had been 41, a dramatic speech where there had been 6 quiet words, a follow-up match that had never taken place. Harold Chin gave an interview in 1981. He said that the details people add to a story like this are not lies, exactly. They are the audience's way of saying that what they were told deserved a bigger room than the room it happened in. Victor Kwong closed his school in 1971. He moved north. He became a correctional officer and, later, a high school physical education teacher in Sacramento. He taught for 19 years. In 2003, a student in his afternoon class asked him if he had ever trained in martial arts. He said that he had. The student asked if he had ever fought anyone famous. He was quiet for a moment. He said yes. He said he had fought Bruce Lee in a gymnasium on Beaudry Avenue in the spring of 1967. The student asked who had won. Victor Kwong smiled. He said, "I walked away with a better education than I arrived with." He said, "That is a better outcome than winning." He had chosen the honest door. He had chosen it 36 years earlier, on a mat in a gymnasium under buzzing fluorescent tubes, and he had never gone back through it. Eddie Mateo, the stunt coordinator, went to see Bruce Lee 3 months after the morning on Beaudry. He asked him what he had said to the big fighter in the white shirt, the thing nobody had heard. Bruce Lee looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I told him that the danger in being very good is that you begin to believe the boundary of your experience is the boundary of what exists." He said he was not sure Kwong had understood him. He said he hoped he had. The light was falling across the production office floor, flat and indifferent to the conversation. The trucks on the boulevard outside moving their cargo without concern for what was being said inside. The lesson of what happened on Beaudry Avenue on that first Tuesday of March 1967 is not a lesson about fighting. It is a lesson about the specific kind of blindness that belongs to excellence. Victor Kwong was not blind because he was foolish. He was blind because he was accomplished. He had mapped his world accurately using the only instruments available to him, his own experience, his own victories, the ceiling that no one had yet shown him to be a ceiling. He walked into that gymnasium with a complete picture of the world, and the world revised it in 8 seconds. And he was man enough to let it be revised. The men who cannot be taught anything are not always the men who have learned nothing. Sometimes they are the men who have learned a great deal and have mistaken that quantity for completion. What you have seen and what you think you can see are not always the same territory. Next week we will tell the story of the afternoon Steve McQueen walked into a closed training session, uninvited, and said 4 words to Bruce Lee that no one who was in the room had anticipated, and what Bruce Lee did next, which Steve McQueen would repeat, word for word, to James Coburn the following morning.